Well, hello, good evening, everybody. Thanks so much for coming. We're going to get started because we like to be prompt. I'm delighted to welcome you this evening to the historic 11th century St Mary le Bow that's been no stranger to controversy and adversity over the years. And it continues to involve itself with the controversial, with its excellent series of JustShare lectures that explore some of the most knotty and important social problems of today. Tonight, we're considering professional philanthropy, which always does court controversy. There's something about people giving, and particularly rich people giving, that does seem to raise the hackles of the great British public. Philanthropy is an issue that concerns me as development manager of City Philanthropy, a Wealth of Opportunity. City Philanthropy, a Wealth of Opportunity, is a 3-year initiative funded by City Bridge Trust, the Corporation of London's charity, and it aims to promote philanthropy in the city and Canary Wharf, particularly among a younger generation of professionals. We want to see philanthropy become a natural and expected part of every person's city career, as it was in the early days of the city. Our initiative talks about the many opportunities of philanthropy, what it delivers to society, obviously, but also to the giver, to businesses, and to the city itself. Giving gives back much more than is given. I'm delighted to say, contrary to popular belief, philanthropy is alive and well in the city. Hundreds of millions of pounds and even more volunteering hours are given each year through the city's institutions, companies and individuals. But of course, much more could be done, and we're encouraging that to happen, as well as facilitating giving amongst a younger generation through our city funding network. We champion giving through awards such as the City Philanthropy Beacon Award. This November, we're staging an exhibition called Philanthropy, the City Story. It's being held at the Charter House, and it's curated by the Museum of London. And it celebrates the proud tradition of philanthropy in the city over the last millennium. And it tells the stories of philanthropists of yesteryear, including Dick Whittington, who was actually a real person, and thrice Lord Mayor of London. The exhibition brings the story bang up to date and highlights the recent innovations in giving, such as venture philanthropy and impact investing. So that brings us to tonight, and tonight we're going to hear from Will Crouch. Will is a PhD student in philosophy at the University of Oxford, and has just returned from Princeton University as a Fulbright scholar there. Will is interested in effective altruism, using one's time and money in order to do as much good as possible. To that end, he has established 2 effective altruist projects, Giving What We Can and 80,000 Hours. Tonight, Will is going to share the concept of earning to give. It centres on the idea that more good can be done by being a high-earning philanthropist than a lower-earning charity worker, and suggests banking can be an ethical career choice, and so the controversy continues. So we'll hear from Will, and then we'll take questions. So, over to you, Will.
Great, thank you all for coming, and I'm absolutely delighted to be able to speak in such a beautiful location. I don't promise to be able to do it justice, but I'll give it a go. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about 80,000 Hours. That's an organization I set up, and its sole purpose is to help young people to have as big a positive impact as possible. And it does that by providing in-depth, one-on-one career advice. And we advise many different career paths, but one I'm just going to talk about is called earning to give. The idea is deliberately pursuing a lucrative career in order that you can donate a large chunk of your income to the best causes. You might think, oh, well, I'm already in a career, what use is career advice to me? But every day when you get up and go to work, even if you're already in a career, and you decide to go into work rather than hand in your resignation and go and do something else, every time you do that, that's making a decision. You're endorsing the career path you're currently on. And I know that many people pursue a career in the city and then think, well, I want to make a difference. I want to do something more ethical. And often they move and go into the not-for-profit sector working for the charity. I'm going to give some considerations to suggest that often, at least, that's a mistake. You can actually do more good by working in a lucrative career and donating than you can by staying in the charity sector or working in the charity sector. I'm going to start off by describing the problem that we kind of face if we want to do good. I'll then move on to give some bad pieces of advice that are nonetheless quite common when thinking about ethical careers. And then I'm going to move on to some considerations that I think are important and that do motivate in favor of earning to give. So the problem that I'm going to talk about is global poverty. At the moment, 1.4 billion people, it's about a fifth of the world's population, live on less than $1.25 per day. It's easy to misunderstand what that means. So you might think, oh, well, $1.25 a day, that's not very much in the UK or the US, but in developing countries, the money goes a lot further. Unfortunately, for the people living below that line, that fact's been already taken into account. So what $1.25 a day means is what $1.25 could buy in the US in 2005. And if you try to imagine that, what could that buy? Kind of very budget bag of rice and maybe some lentils. And remember, that's $1.25 includes everything they consume. It's not just what they earn. So any shelter they're living in, any sticks they collect from the forest, that's all counted in $1.25 a day. So the way to think about it is imagine you go to somewhere like Kenya or Zambia and you have 60 cents per day to live on every day. What would you be able to do with that? And the answer is not a lot. In fact, it's just almost impossible to imagine for we in the West how grave and the destitution is for people living below that line of extreme poverty. You might think, well, okay, they're pretty poor, but there's a lot of poverty in our own country as well, in the UK and the US, and, you know, I could be doing better myself as well. Again, I think the scale of global poverty or extreme poverty in the developing world just far exceeds any poverty that occurs in the UK. So I'm currently on a graduate stipend. I'm not earning that much. I'm earning about £13,500 per year. Even that puts me in the top 8% of the richest people worldwide. Even after I give 10% of my income, I'm still in the richest 10% of the people worldwide. And I'm the sort of person that people kind of refer to as a starving student, struggling to get by, and so on. But it seems that there's no way I can legitimately say that when I'm still richer than 90% of the people in the world. In fact, I should think of myself as extremely well off at the moment, even after my giving. And in fact, I certainly expect to be earning more than, say, £34,000 over the course of my life. And I think giving a talk to people based in London or the city, I imagine most of the audience is also living on more than that. Well, that's the magic number at which you find yourself in the richest 1% of the world's population, even after you've given 10% of that away. That makes you about 100 times richer than the poorest 1.4 billion people in the world. And it's easy to get pretty depressed by that. I certainly felt pretty down by these statistics for quite a while. But there is a flip side. Scale of global inequality and the fact that we find ourselves in the richest 1 or 2%, it indicates the world's a very unfair place, but it also means we have this tremendous ability to do huge amounts of good in the world if we really want to. And we have that opportunity simply in virtue of being born into an affluent country. And that's something pretty remarkable. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about this in this talk. So, as I've said, the problem is pretty huge, and it's important to think about it in the right way. If you think about it in terms of how can I solve this problem, how can I end global poverty, well, it's too big. You're just not going to be able to do that. It's simply not possible. So rather, what you should try and think about is how can I just do the most with my time? So over the course of your life, you'll spend about 80,000 working hours, and that's where the name 80,000 hours of the organization I set up comes from. And you might think, wow, that's a lot of time. That's like real drudgery. But actually, 80,000 hours is almost nothing when you compare it to the scale of the problems in the world. So what you've got to think is, I've got this tiny amount of time, this almost what might seem like an insignificant amount of time, 80,000 hours, but I want to use it as well as possible, use it to do the most good that I can. And I'm going to give you some considerations about how you can do that. I've found these considerations very powerful, and others have too. For me, they've led me to change my research focus, in my spare time set up a couple of not-for-profit projects, and pledge to give everything I earn above about £20,000. I know we've got at least one person in the audience who's completely beaten me, gone much further than that, and is pursuing what I call learning to give, donating what he plans about 75% of his earnings over the course of his life. I think that comes out about £8 million over the course of his life. So this is really pretty significant. And when directed to the best causes, it can do huge amounts of good. So I'm going to start off with 3 pieces of bad advice. These are the advice that are very common when thinking about career choice. The first is the idea of following your passion. Now, I think that's just about the stupidest piece of advice you can possibly give someone when they're embarking on a career. And here's why. When I started off, when I was a young person, thinking about what degree to pursue and so on, I had a passion for Boy Scouting. It's kind of embarrassing for me to say this, but I was really good at it. I actually won awards. I actually had a claim to being the best scout in Scotland, age 15. I was just really good at camping, and my particular passion was knots. So I still know them as well. I have this incredible knowledge of the difference between a carrick bend, a sheep shank, a sheet bend, double figure of 8 knot. I would know knots for like every single sort of situation, and I'd sometimes, embarrassing though it is, spend my evenings kind of learning new knots. And so if that was my passion at the time, then what I should have done following my passion was, I don't know, learn how to create little mats that I could sell to people on the street or something. But I don't think that would have been very useful. I had a passion that wasn't really for something that's very socially valuable. Even worse, though, you might have a passion for doing something actively harmful. So I have a friend called Dodgy Dave, and his passion is for dealing crack cocaine to school children. And if he was following his passion, that would be an absolute disaster. More to the point, some people have many passions, and they're the lucky ones. But most people have none. Only, out of students surveyed, only about 4% of people have work-related passions. So for all those people who don't have a passion or calling in life, what should they do? The second piece of advice I'll consider is a little better, but it's still stupid. It's called do what you're good at. And the reason why that piece of advice is pretty stupid, I think, is because the choice of career or what to do with your life is a choice about what to become good at. We're not born into the world as natural artists or mathematicians or philosophers or philanthropists, certainly not as managers or accountants. In general, getting expertise in something, even for those things we think of as what people have a natural talent for, like art or mathematics, takes tens of thousands of hours. So if you're pursuing a career, it's a decision about what to become good at, in almost all cases. The third piece of bad advice is getting better again, and it's almost there, but not quite. And this advice particularly pertains to ethical careers, and it's the advice of making a difference. Now, there's 2 things wrong with this. The first is that it says you can make a difference to the world in a couple of ways. You could make a positive difference, or you could make a negative difference. If you burn someone's house down, you've definitely made a difference to their life, but that's, again, not the sort of thing we want to be recommending. I'll kind of digress and note that the UK Army, when doing recruitment, actually advertises itself with the Make a Difference slogan, and I sometimes think it's exploiting this loophole. The second thing, though, again, more to the point, is the A. So it says make a difference. It doesn't tell you to make more of a difference than you can, and there are many ways of doing good in the world, and why shouldn't we focus on what's best? So I'll give an example of this, which is Play Pumps International. It became this huge thing in 2005. The idea behind Play Pumps International, or the idea of a play pump, is rather than a normal handheld pump in the developing world, to pump clean water out of a borehole, they'd have a playground merry-go-round. And one of the things kids push and then jump on and spin on. And the force of the kids pushing on this would pump clean water out of the ground. So it looked like a win-win. The children would get to play, and clean water would be provided for the village. And it got huge amounts of attention. It got a $10 million grant from the then First Lady, First Bush. It won a World Bank Development Award. It even got a site visit and sponsorship from Jay-Z. All the kind of world's newspapers absolutely loved this idea. The only problem with it was that it just wasn't very good as an idea. It wasn't very good at pumping water. Children would need to play on it 27 hours per day in order to pump enough water to meet the requirements. It also was a little bit different from a normal playground merry-go-round, insofar as normally if you push a merry-go-round and then jump on it, then it spins freely, just on the basis of its own momentum. In contrast, because you're needing to pump water, you've got to keep pushing it. And so the children would report getting extremely tired, and they wouldn't want to play on it. So middle-aged women often would be pushing it instead. And they'd feel incredibly embarrassed. Sometimes they'd fall off. Occasionally they'd vomit from the exertion. In one village, children were actually paid to play on the pump. The worst thing overall was that the communities just weren't consulted about this at all. In fact, most of them preferred the old hand pumps, which were also a third of the price. So Play Pumps International, to kind of international acclaim, was distributing something worse than was already there for 3 times the amount of money. And now I have complete respect for them because they recognized that they'd made a mistake and in 2010 shut down. That might have been the best thing they did, actually. But I think what's certainly true is that they made a difference. They caused a bit of disruption in local communities that would create some amount of harm, but I think on balance what they did was net good. But was it what they should have been doing? Well, clearly not. There were other things that were better. They could have made more of a difference rather than less. And when you've got that opportunity to benefit people more, well, surely it's obvious that you should try to take that. And so the slogan I'm going to kind of emphasize is this idea of making the most difference. And that's why I'm going to embark on this project of comparing different career paths, both of which I think are good, both of which make the world a better place, but one I think is significantly better for many people than the other. Okay, so the 3 considerations I'm going to give in favor of earning to give over charity work are as follows. The first is sheer financial discrepancy. So as a charity worker, say a doctor in the developing world, maybe you get paid £30,000 a year. That's about what a doctor in South Africa gets paid. In contrast, if you take a lucrative career in the city and then donate a decent proportion of that, 50% or something, well, you can employ several charity workers. In exactly the same role you would have been, you can employ several people to be doing the same work. In which case, it's just got to be the case that you're doing several times as much good. The second consideration focuses on this idea of making a difference and what that means. So, absolutely crucially, making a difference requires doing something that wouldn't have happened otherwise. So, to illustrate this, imagine there's a woman who's had a heart attack and she's on the ground, and there's a crowd of people gathered around now, and paramedics have come and they're starting to administer CPR. And it looks pretty good, actually. It looks like they're going to be able to restart her heart and save her life. And now, let's suppose you run in and you think, well, I just want to make a direct impact. I want it to be me the one that saves her life. So you push the paramedics out the way and you start doing your own kind of substandard CPR. And let's say you do manage to restart her heart. You bring her back to life, but she ends up severely disabled as a result. If you took from that, hey, I'm a hero, I saved her life, you'd be making a real mistake, because if you hadn't acted as you did, even though you provided a benefit, you saved her life, the paramedics would have done a much better job. And this is a crucial consideration when it comes to career choice. So charity work is competitive, and if you think about what would have happened if I didn't work for this developing world charity, let's say, what would have been the outcome? Is it that the job would have just been empty? Clearly not. Every job has many applicants for it, and if you don't work in that position, someone else will be working in that same job, doing maybe not quite as much good as you would do, but almost as much. So the difference you make isn't the amount of benefit you provide in the job. So if you're saving 10 lives every week or something in the job, the benefit you provide isn't that 10 lives. It's the difference between how many lives you save and how many lives the person who would have been in your shoes would have saved. And that's much smaller than you might think. In contrast, if you think about earning to give, most people who go into the financial sector, let's say, or most people who take lucrative careers donate very little. In the UK, it's actually less than 0.7% on average. Whereas if you go in and donate 50%, then you're making a huge difference that wouldn't have happened otherwise. Because If you hadn't taken that job, absolutely sure there would have been a banker, there would have been someone else doing that same job, but they would have donated very little. And that means almost all the benefit that you do wouldn't have happened otherwise. Another way of thinking about this at the charity level is, whereas if you work for the charity, you change who works for the charity, but you don't change the number of people or the total amount of resources the charity has. In contrast, if you donate, you enable the charity to hire more charity workers. So that's the second consideration. The third is the idea of flexibility. So money perhaps can't buy you love, but it can buy most things. And I just spent a year in the US. It seems like it can buy elections too, unfortunately. And this is absolutely important because of two reasons. So if you become a professional philanthropist or you earn to give, you can donate to all the organizations that you think are best. You're not restricted in where you can donate. And this is important in two ways. First, it means that if evidence changes, then you're able to move your donations with the evidence. New opportunities might arise. So, and when your career is over 30 or 40 years, this is a really big deal. 20 years ago, climate change wasn't really on the agenda, certainly 25 years ago. And you might well have thought, okay, I'm going to go into global poverty or just tuberculosis, because that's the best thing I can do. But then imagine 20 years later, you realize, oh, actually, green technology was the best thing I could have been doing. If you're working in the charitable sector, it's very difficult to switch. If you're earning to give, it's very easy to switch where your donations go. So that's the first important point. Even more important, and I think this is the most important point of all, is that you can direct your money only to the very best and most cost-effective charities. Those charities that do the most good with every pound or dollar they receive. And you might think, well, how big a deal is that? I don't know. Don't all charities do good work? How do you even measure this? Luckily, there are charity evaluators like GiveWell and like Giving What We Can, which I also was involved in setting up with a few years ago. And they draw on the latest research from health and development economics in order to work out what are the causes or what are the charities that do the most good with every pound or dollar they receive. It's easiest to focus within global health because there you can get the most quantitative kind of comparisons. So health economists normally use this metric called a quality-adjusted life year, or QALY. The idea is that in health terms, there are two ways in which you can benefit someone. You can extend their life or save their life. I mean, people always die at some point, so you're never really saving someone's life. You're just extending it by a certain period of time. Or there's another way you can benefit them, which is just by making them better off. And the QALY metric incorporates both of these things. And it looks at all these different interventions and health interventions or health programs you can do and asks, which are the ones that provide the most years of very high quality health for the given amount of money? And somewhere like the NHS will say, okay, it's about £20,000 or £30,000. If something's can give 1 year of very high quality health for less than that, then we're willing to fund it. And I think that's a great deal. It's something I'd be very willing to spend my money on. But in the developing world, you can just do so much better. In fact, you can do 1,000 times as well. By distributing insecticide-treated bed nets through the Against Malaria Foundation, which is top recommended charity from both these charity evaluators, well, then you're giving 1 year of very high-quality health for about £15. And this is just absolutely remarkable. It's 1,000 times better than it needed to be a good deal. But if you were just in the charity sector, it's very unlikely that you could choose only to work for the very best charity. In fact, Against Malaria Foundation only has one paid staff member. The executive director works for free. They have one tech person, and all the rest of the money goes in buying and distributing bed nets. So you just simply wouldn't be able to work for them if you could, even if you wanted to, or even if you were very talented. But you can donate to them. And because the discrepancy among different interventions, different charities is so great, I think in the real world, the world as it is, that's the most important consideration. So you might think, though, okay, I've got these ideals and I've given these arguments, but who's actually going to do this? The answer is actually quite a few people have already started doing it. So I started giving these arguments a couple of years ago. I certainly wasn't the first person to have thought of this, but I kind of put all the arguments together. And already, to a greater or lesser degree, not everyone is going to just donate all they can, but a lot of people deliberately are taking a higher earning career in order that they can donate more. There might be something like 100 people now doing this, of varying degrees. So a friend who's working on Wall Street, in his first year and a half, he's going to be able to donate about $150,000. Beforehand, when he was deciding what career to pursue, he was thinking, should I become a campaigner or should I work in finance and do earning to give? And in his first year alone, he's able to pay for 4 campaigners to be in his place. He's also, if he wishes, could spend it on bed nets. That money would be enough to save about 75 lives. Or with the same amount of money, he could deworm a staggering 200,000 school children. So if you wanted me to talk about deworming, it's not a very nice topic, but it's, again, one of the most cost-effective things you can do. I also have very honored to have another person in the audience who I mentioned who's also pursuing that. You can talk to him afterwards. Again, he's planning to donate about 75% of his earnings over the course of your life. Okay, so those are some of the people who are pursuing this. Question for you now is, what next? So you might be convinced of this, or you might think, well, maybe earning for give isn't for me, but this idea of just dedicating my life and doing the most good, or at least trying in my life to do more good than I could have done, yeah, damn it, I'm on board. In which case, there's a few things. So the first and most important thing is just to talk to me. If you're interested in making doing good a really large part of your life, then I really want to talk to you. It's this incredibly high-value opportunity you have. Second is that we provide in-depth, 80,000 hours provides in-depth one-on-one career advice. So if you want to really go over your personal situation and values and experiences, you can talk to someone who's done a lot of research, thought about this a lot, and will be able to give you tailored advice. Third thing is online recommendations as well. So some of these considerations and arguments that I've given, they're all on the website. And we don't just focus on earning to give. Of course, it would be very narrow to think this is the only way of doing good in the world, or even the only way of doing a lot of good in the world. And so you can look at some of our other recommendations there as well. And then the final thing is a community. So deciding to give a large proportion of your earnings can be quite a scary thing. I certainly felt just so worried, just so anxious before I decided to pledge about 50% of my earnings. But what really changed it for me was having a community. It was a decision that had been on my mind, but as soon as I met someone else who was doing the same thing, then it became a lot easier. And now within the 80,000 hours community, we've got over 500 people who are doing things like this, being able to support each other and also help each other be more successful. So if you know someone who's dedicated to doing good, then making them more successful at doing that is a great thing to do in the world. So we also have a vibrant community that we can join as well. And again, I'm happy to talk about that in questions. So I'm going to wrap up with 4 lessons of this talk. Maybe 5 if I include don't follow your passion, just to hammer that home. Or if you do, then you're like lucky to have one. The 4 lessons are: 1, think about benefiting indirectly. It's very natural and perfectly understandable if you're concerned about a social problem to want to engage with that directly. But the trouble is that everyone does that. And so there are often far greater benefits to be had by doing something indirect like earning to give. Second is to do something that wouldn't have happened otherwise. If you do something that would have happened in exactly the same way had you not done it, well, then you haven't done any good at all. However, if you do something that just wouldn't have happened, then all the good you do is just as the direct impact you make. Third is be flexible. Keep your options open. A lot's going to change over the course of your life. 80,000 hours is a long time, and evidence will change, opportunities will change. So you want to take a career path where you're able to switch between different cause areas over the course of your life. And the fourth and most important thing is focus on the very best causes. Do your homework and do your research, because the very best causes are literally thousands of times better, even than causes that already do good. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to take some questions from the floor. I think we're just going to move this out of the way. Is that
Feels very space age.
It does, doesn't it?
We okay? Okay, great. So, questions from the floor on those interesting and thought-provoking points. Do we have any questions from the floor?
Hello, can you hear me? Hi, I'm Susie. I'm from Investec Bank Social Investment Team. I just recently decided to make a career change from being a corporate banker. So a lot of what you said is very relevant to me. And I was really interested in the last point that you raised about choosing the best causes. You spoke about metrics, etc., that exist in healthcare, but I'm interested in other tips for choosing causes, especially I'm passionate about education. I'm making that part of my job, so maybe I'm going against your advice. But how do you assess what's the best cause, and what are your tips?
So the first thing to say is that the evidence out there, it's not as good as I'd like to be. It's by no means perfect. However, it is better than doing nothing at all. So pursuing the best advice, even if you think, well, it could be better, it's still better than just not having any advice at all. The best place to go in terms of charity effectiveness and looking at different causes where they have a huge amount of depth is givewell.com. There's just absolutely huge amount of advice there. 80,000 hours and Giving What We Can also provide advice on this question as well. And they draw on research. If you want to dig even deeper, they just draw on academic research from places like the Poverty Action Lab at MIT and Disease Control Priorities Network. In terms of education, if you're thinking about the developing world, Poverty Action Lab have already done a certain amount of really high-quality research into education in the developing world. A couple of things that are kind of surprising. One is that certain health interventions are actually some among the best interventions for improving education. So deworming once upon a time was the best thing we knew of at just improving educational outcomes. The reason being that attendance rates in primary schools are just very low across the developing world. And we don't exactly know why. There are kind of a lot of hypotheses and so on. But one major reason is just the kids are sick and just can't go. And so by providing a health benefit, you can also provide an educational benefit. I think what they recommend now is just simply going and educating mothers about the economic benefits of sending your children to school. Because it's not something that's kind of obvious, especially when you think your child could be helping with farming or so on. I think taking this kind of long-term view about and knowing exactly the benefits that education can provide is not something that's obvious, I think. And so I think that's what they top recommend. Like I say, GiveWell has kind of really nice summaries of this, but the Poverty Action Lab is somewhere which focuses on education as well, specifically. So.
And I can recommend a great book as well, which is It Ain't What You Give, It's the Way That You Give It, by Caroline Fiennes, who takes a very evidence to giving, and she will rise about how principles that you could look out for. And I know that was an example she's given too.
Yeah.
But, yeah, that's a great book. Caroline Fiennes, yeah.
Fiennes.
Another question? Okay, one at the back, and then we'll take one down the front.
Hi, my name's Bryony, and thanks for what you said. I found it really interesting. I just want to check my own understanding from some of the stuff that you said. I work for a charity, and I really feel that I have followed my passion, and that's something that's really important to me and keeps me motivated and engaged. Obviously, everybody works and lives life and has different reasons for what they do. But if you don't follow your passions, why do you stick to something?
Yeah.
And are you saying that you should just go out and make the most good, do the most good, i.e. make the most money, and then give to these charities who are those charities staffed by if nobody's following their passions? And I don't know if I've got the wrong end of the stick there, but I'm just kind of interested in if you're not following your passions and you're discovering something else about yourself, what is your motivation for getting up in the morning, I guess?
Great.
Thanks.
Okay, cool. So I think it was a little bit echoey, so I might have missed a couple of points. But one thing is crucial then, which I think is just absolutely spot on point that I didn't address in the talk, so don't worry, is, this idea of burnout, or like, how do you actually keep going? And for many people, I think, if they think, well, a career in the financial sector, I just couldn't physically do it. Like, it would be like the most repulsive thing to me, and I'd get really depressed and then just leave. In which case, I'd have accomplished nothing. And that's something you've just got to take into account. So I think it's just perfectly acceptable, and in fact, like, mandatory to take into account your own personal situation, and take into account just what could you actually do, what could get you up in the morning. I think, though, there is evidence suggesting that we overestimate how much our kind of passions are fixed and how much we'll really get excited by something once we pursue it. So any job that has like certain mental satisfaction and so on, I mean, you might think beforehand, well, it's just not going to be very rewarding at all. Often once you get into something and you're able to use your abilities and talents and develop a skill and so on, it's actually, from the evidence, it looks like more often than you might think, you actually then end up developing a passion for this kind of arbitrary thing. I've certainly found that in the past. I would have previously said, well, my passion is just for philosophy, forget everything else. And then I felt like, okay, I should be doing some things more practical. Turns out, like, I ended up having a passion for giving talks, even though 4 years ago or something, thought of giving a talk would like keep me up at night for like the week beforehand or something. Similarly with like really boring things, managing, like keeping budgets and so on. Like, I even enjoy that now as well. And I think, like, not for everyone, but for many people, earning and giving, like, that's just this amazing thing to do as well. And you can just, it's maybe not as easy to get passionate about that as it is for directly benefiting people, but I think you certainly can. And I think there's ways of reinforcing that as well. So being part of a shared community who are all kind of supporting you, I think that can really help. And avoiding this kind of burnout worry is one reason why we have this community. Also, if you need to, just see the kind of sites. So I know someone who's, he again works in the city, and on the basis of giving what he can's recommendation, he made a rather large donation and now can fund the entire deworming program of Burundi for several years. And it's like, if that wouldn't get me up in the morning, then like, I don't know, maybe nothing would. And he's now visiting the site as well, so he can get that kind of concrete feedback. But if you think like, no, I just hate that, like, then, and I just wouldn't be able to do it, and I wouldn't do it well, and I'd have much less impact, then yeah, definitely don't do it.
Hi, my name is Charlie. Before I ask Will the two questions I wanted to ask, I do want to comment about the last question in the back. I spent 20 years pursuing something that was not my passion, and all I was running a large North American retail company for 20 years. Yeah, and I didn't really care for it too much in terms of what I was doing, but I was very passionate about my family, so supporting my family was part of what helped get me up in the morning. And the other thing was I developed all these extraordinary relationships with people. So although I wasn't passionate about selling men's clothing, I was very passionate about the people I work with, so that really helped. And then I just signed on for another 5 years of helping this company, and that's more in the line of what Will was talking about in terms of feeling I can do this for another 5 years because it allows me to do earn to give, which I should have been doing for 20 previous years, but at least I figure I'm 63, I can do it for 5 years now. So the passion came from my family, my coworkers, not necessarily what I was doing. So that is just a comment about that. But Will, I want to thank you for a spectacular talk. I wasn't necessarily someone coming here completely enamored of 80,000 hours, but I think it was really well done. And I wanted to ask you, is the talk in that same coherent way on the website? I mean, can it be followed on the website? Maybe not as well as you gave it, but is the argument on the website pretty well?
Yeah, so there's the argument is on the website. There's both, not in exactly that form, but there is a video with kind of animations. It still uses, we used to use the term professional philanthropy, and now we prefer earn to give because it's a bit more accurate. And that video is on the website. We also have a web page describing the kind of arguments in favor of earning to give as well. And like I say, kind of 80,000 hours and what we think is high-impact ethical careers, it's not just earning to give. In fact, I know, so the person asking the question is an example of someone moving from a kind of career where he could be earning to give into a charitable sector, but because he's focusing on something extremely high value, I think that's a great thing to do. So that argument is on the website, as is arguments about other very high-value career paths.
Then there was one more question. This is a little more challenging maybe, but as a philosopher and as well as just a bright human being, what do you think the best argument against earning to give is that you as a philosopher would make if you were making an argument, or you as a person would make? What would be the best argument you could muster if you had to argue the other side?
Great, thank you so much. Came all the way from Oxford, but the questions are still the same. So I think the best argument is that you can do something even better. So there's a kind of theoretical and an empirical argument for this. Theoretical is, as an altruist, there's a kind of amazing advantage you have over everyone else, which is that you're not competing with them. In fact, you have very different aims from everyone else, which is just like doing as much good as you can rather than kind of benefiting yourself, which is, roughly speaking, that's what economists like to model people as mainly doing. In which case, it's then kind of odd doing a path where you're competing with everyone else, trying to make as much money as you can. So the theoretical argument is that you should be able to do even more good by influencing other people in order to do good. Let's go after Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and so on, and try and convince them to spend their money as effectively as possible. So that's a theoretical argument. And then I think, well, how hard is it to do it and so on? And then the empirical argument is, and the person who makes this to me most often is someone who really has been able to do that. Not through billionaires, but through government funding. He's been able to work in the World Bank and moved $400 to $500 million. Not to the causes he thought was very best, he was a little bit more constrained. But the amount of money there is just absolutely huge. And so I actually think it's even more difficult to do. I think the bar in terms of like every day being motivated, having the right sort of skills and so on, are even higher. But I think being able to shift large amounts of resources where they're already being spent badly, like in government and like in extremely high net worth for the extremely high net worth individuals, can be even better again. So that would be my best argument against.
Thank you for a most interesting lecture. Your arguments, although they were against the grain, they were very persuasive and quite interesting. I'd like to ask you what you think of you say that you give through earning. Do you acknowledge that you can give through not earning or not earning enough by giving your time, which is a very valuable commodity that a lot of people offer in the city while they're working, or retired people, or people who have spare time and they offer their services in the voluntary sector. What are your views on that? And of course, it is the government, the current government, that they say about the big society and the volunteering, etc., which I don't think that it has been very, very successful. But I would like to know how you view this type of offering.
Yeah. Okay, great. That's a great question. So the question was, well, what about giving your time rather than just giving your money? Like, what's the value of that? And so I think it depends on the specific subsector. So just as an organization I know quite well, GiveWell, they actually they're a not-for-profit organization, but they need talent more than money. They've actually got more money than they can spend well, because they just actually need really high-quality people working for them. So in that case, then I say, yeah, work for them. Just donate or volunteer if you can. Like, give them your time if you're sufficiently well qualified. When we look at the charitable sector as a whole, though, it just seems that people are more willing to give their time than they are to give their money. People very regularly volunteer, whereas I've never heard of anyone actually, apart from maybe the people in my close circle, who, rather than volunteering, would just earn and donate the money. Would just say, okay, well, I'll take a part-time job or work a few extra hours. Even though I think often that's a way of doing a lot more good. In fact, quite a lot of not-for-profits, when they take on volunteers, the actual volunteering might not be that useful to them, but the benefit is that if you volunteer for an organization, you're more likely to donate to them. And as someone who runs a non-profit as well, I do know that, like, for volunteers who are volunteering less than, say, 4 hours a week, it becomes unclear in terms of the management overhead, whether it's worth taking that volunteer on. So in this situation where people generally focus much more on donating their time rather than their money, and if you want to do the most good, well, that means do the thing that's currently neglected, which is, and neglected, I think, because it's it seems less altruistic. Seems like what the self-interested people do, which is trying to generate more financial resources rather than just simply to generate more kind of man hours.
I think also, if I could add that, certainly what we're seeing is that young people are wanting to do both. They want to give their money and give time, and certainly, there's a sort of double impact of that, and that's something they get back from. And skilled volunteering is really a growing kind of trend, isn't it? And sort of venture philanthropy, where you're putting in skills to build the capacity of an organisation as well as give money, is another trend. So both are sort of hand in hand is sort of a bigger value, isn't it? Great, we had a question down the back.
Thanks. I'm just wondering, to what extent do you think it's important to consider the source of a philanthropist's wealth? So if someone's going to donate a large proportion of their salary to charity, that's obviously good. But if that wealth was made, say, investing in weapons manufacture or facilitating multinational tax avoidance, do you think the net gain from that donation would just be zero, as in the damage done by the day job offsets any good that'll be done through the charity?
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. So the question is, what if you're making money by working for some really immoral corporation, something like the arms industry or tax avoidance or something? And I think, obviously that's a really important consideration. You don't want to do harm, and you might very reasonably as well think doing good isn't simply like how much good do you do minus how much harm do you do. You might think it's worse to do harm than it is to do good, and you have to weigh that up. I think there are quite a few considerations. The first is you don't want to have an attitude of do no harm at all. That would actually just mean you shouldn't pursue any career. So even working as a doctor, you're going to do harm, which is kind of paradigm doing good job. So in the course of your life, you'll be dealing with hundreds or thousands of life or death situations. Sometimes you'll be tired, sometimes you'll be hungover, sometimes you'll just simply make a mistake, and someone will be much worse off. Maybe someone will die who wouldn't have died had you done that job. Now, that's not by any means to denigrate doctors. It's just to say every career is a matter of weighing up the harm you do and the benefit you do. So we can't have this completely strict kind of do no harm approach, because it would just be absolutely paralyzing. The second point is then there are just huge numbers of incredibly lucrative careers, and some, I think, are harmful in the career you do, some are zero-sum. So I think a lot of finance, especially fast trading, is basically of no social value but not harmful either. And then some are of massive positive social value. So becoming a tech entrepreneur, I think often generates huge amounts of social value in and of itself, and then also can be even more lucrative than typical sort of city jobs. And so factoring the kind of harm you do in the career might well suggest that, well, don't work for BAE or like don't work in the arms industry. And I think that probably sounds right. Instead, work for something like social entrepreneurship or finance where you can be having a benefit through that. But I'm also going to finish, because I'm a philosopher, with the most interesting philosophical consideration, which is this, the placeability effect again. So I actually think you can do a lot of good by working for an immoral organization. Again, because what's the difference you make? It's not what you do in the job. It's the difference between what you do and the person who would have been in your shoes. So if you can go into work for an immoral corporation and make them a bit better, do a bit more good or less harm than the person who would have been in your shoes, well, then you're making the world a better place. And when I first thought, I just thought that's like this crazy argument. It doesn't make any sense. There must be something wrong with it, even if the kind of logic seems to work. But I was kind of reassured by this real-life example. So you might think, okay, way worse than working for the arms industry is working for the Nazis. Like in terms of bad organizations, I don't think you can get much worse than working for them. So if you were working for the Nazis, like running an arms munitions factory or something and deliberately doing a bit worse than the person in your shoes, how could that be a good thing? You might think that's just a reductio ad absurdum of the whole argument. But we do have an example of that. So Oskar Schindler, you might have seen Schindler's List or read the book Schindler's Ark or know the story. He deliberately pursued a job running arms factory, munitions and ammunitions factories for the Nazis, deliberately did a bit worse. He deliberately worked his laborers a bit less hard than the person who would have been in his shoes, in order that he could literally buy the lives of 1,200 Jews in Germany. And looking back, we now think, what an absolute hero, that was amazing. And we kind of recognize that he did provide a benefit by working there and being something of a saboteur. And we might think, well, it was a war, it was a kind of special time, but I think in terms of the scale of the problem, we're in that situation. Things are just as serious and drastic, and that might mean you have to pursue certain things that don't seem, on the face of it, ethical, but actually do huge amounts of good. And that might be one of these examples. I think in practice, it doesn't actually matter much. It's more kind of philosophical consideration. In practice, I'd recommend something that doesn't do harm, but it's something that's worth kind of thinking about anyway.
Yeah, one at the back there.
There's two over here. Can we take these two together?
Yes, let's do two. Yeah.
Hello, I've just got an observation on impact assessment, because that's something that seems to be very, more than ever, is something which is a subject of conversation, and just a question about that. So the observation is that, having spent part of my career working in international development, and the observation there is that when you're working internationally, it is actually much more difficult to demonstrate impact, because the culture and so on that you're working in demands interventions at a very, very early stage. So, so I'm just counselling, I suppose, a bit of caution for the, it's all, the kind of, it's about malaria nets, it's about, injections, it's about etc. Because yes, of course it is. But when I worked for ActionAid as Director of Communications, we had to work in communities for many years, say in Afghanistan or post-conflict, DRC or somewhere, working with the women, working with the community leaders, day in, day out, to even get to a point where we could start talking to them about girls going to school, at which point we can start talking about what kinds of schools, what kinds of teachers, etc., before you could ever get to the situation where you would even begin to dream about building a school. And that kind of work is extremely difficult to demonstrate, money in, money out impact for. So that was kind of the international observation. I'm actually working domestically now, and setting up an organisation which is tackling youth unemployment in the UK by a new type of digital internship for young people. And that is much more easy, in a sense, to evaluate, because you can fund a young person into work. You can follow them through. You can mentor a young person, in terms of doing on a one-to-one basis. And you can see, you can take interns into your own organisation. So there's all kinds of different ways of demonstrating and measuring that impact. So that's the observation, just the difference between the international and the national. So I'll be interested in your observation on that.
Okay, great. So
can we take one more and then perhaps you answer them both? Yeah.
Oh, so I think this is the last question. Is that right? Oh.
One more, yeah.
Oh, okay.
That's the last one, yeah.
Okay. So my question was this. 80,000 hours has a beginning and it has an end. Now, I wish I'd heard this talk at the beginning of my 80,000 hours. What I'm wondering now, and I don't know the answer to this, is whether the best thing to do actually changes depending on whether you're looking forward to the 80,000 hours in front of you or whether you're looking back on what you've achieved with your working career. And I just wondered if you'd had any thoughts on that.
Okay, great. So the first question was, in the international development setting, often it's just extremely difficult to demonstrate impact. And so the worry then, I think, that was implicit there is if you're just focusing on those organizations that can demonstrate the highest impact per dollar, then you'll be neglecting all these things that don't have such easily quantifiable impact. And I think this is a great issue. So I don't have any principle that it's not like I just love randomized controlled trials. I'm just going to go with kind of whatever I think will do the most good with every dollar I receive. And that doesn't have to be in terms of being able to do randomized trials and demonstrate impact every year or so on. In fact, I think charities often, if they were set up correctly, wouldn't need to kind of demonstrate that they've been having an impact. But what happens, unfortunately, at the moment is there's always research that recommends certain interventions over others, like these are the really best activities. But then the activities that charities do don't necessarily match up with them. So one of the charities I support, Deworm the World, it doesn't do much impact evaluation itself, but it feels it doesn't need to because it's already picked deworming, which it regards as, which there's good evidence to suppose is one of these very best interventions. But you might still think, well, that's, even if you're going with the academic research, that's naturally going to be biased in terms of what has concrete, demonstrable results. And I think I have two thoughts there. So one is that I think that can be okay. So if you imagine, here are all the activities that you can quantify, and here are the ones that aren't. If you're going for one of these, then it's kind of, you don't know whether it's going to be a good one or a bad one. And at the moment, we still have cripplingly underfunded interventions that are extremely cost-effective that we can quantify. In which case, why aren't we going for the ones that we do know have a huge impact, rather than going in something where we don't really know? The second is that there can be just theoretical arguments as well. So economists don't simply rely on randomized controlled trials or day-to-day impact assessment. They also think, well, I've got this certain theory of how markets work and how people work and how trade works and so on. And given all this, and this might be well confirmed in other areas, and given all this, this should work really well. Even though it's like, you really can't, maybe it's not the sort of thing that you'd be able to prove has an impact. In which case, I'd be very much in favor of that as well, if we really thought that it was able to do more good than those things that you can prove with kind of randomized controlled trials. The second question then was on, well, what if you're kind of midway through your career? You've done 40,000 and you've got 40,000 left. Kind of how does that change things? And I think it changes things quite a lot, not necessarily in terms of the question asked, how do I evaluate going previous, like how my life has gone? I guess there is one difference where beforehand you don't know how things are going to turn out, and you might have done something that maybe wasn't even a very good idea, but you got lucky and it just worked out really well. Then you could think, looking back, okay, it wasn't what I should have done, but yeah, it did a really good thing. I think it does change how you should view the final kind of 40,000 hours of your life, because you've built up all this career capital, so you now have a certain CV, certain skills, certain experiences. You do have things that you're particularly good at. You do have a kind of particular network. And then, even more so than at the early stage, how you ought to spend those final 40,000 hours is crucially dependent on what you've already done so far and kind of your kind of place in the world. So that's what I'd say. Listen a little bit less to the theoretical arguments I've given you and a little bit more on your particular situation. But thanks, that's a great question.
Thank you. Thanks, Will. Thanks for making those fantastic points interesting and hopefully leaving us all a little bit more optimistic about what we can do with our 80,000 hours. Although now when we're working to 70, we might want to change that to 100,000 hours.
It's a kind of low bar. Some people, I think, are working a lot more than that.
So no matter how many thousand hours we've got left, let's think positively about what we can do more proactively. If you'd like to continue the conversation, join us at the back for refreshments.